I'm Jim Martin. In this session, we're going to take a look at statistical concepts and market returns. So let's talk about measures of central tendency. Very important concept for any professional exam, especially a CFA level exam. So here we're looking at population and sample means. They have different symbols, but they're both arithmetic means. Now, whenever I see measures of central tendency, the first thing that pops into my head, and sorry about my drawing skills or lack thereof, I think of the normal bell curve where we have our mean, and then we have our median, and we also have our mode. So here we're looking at calculating the means, okay? So let's go ahead and dive right into an example. Here we're looking at a stock. We've got 3 years of returns. Now you can enter these as a decimal or whole number in your calculator. I prefer to work in whole numbers. I think it makes it easier. You don't have to calculate, or you don't have to input, say, 0.06. You just have to input 6. And I think it's much easier to do that and, say, less prone to error. But it's up to you. But I do, like I said, like to work in whole numbers. So we're given these returns here, and we're simply asked to calculate the mean return. Now, I can almost eyeball this. We know we have 3 years, and we can add it up, and we can see we have 18. So you probably can get an idea of what the mean will be. But I'm going to leave that up to your imagination. I'm going to put a question mark there and show you how we're going to walk through this on your calculator, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So now what we're going to do is let's go over to our emulator, and we're going to go second, and we're going to enter our data entry mode, and we can see that we have a value stored in our X01. Well, that's not a good thing, and that's what you want to make sure that you clear all your stored data in memory. So check this out. We're going to do second, and then we're going to do clear work. So we're going to start fresh, and that's very important that you do that. Make sure that if you're working with another series of data that you do clear this out before entering in a new series. So we're going to do 6 for our first year's return, enter. And then we're going to go down and we see, oh, another number. Now, but we see a Y01 here. Now, this is used for entering the probability of the X variable occurring. As we using historic data, this can be left blank. Okay, now that's a strong way of saying you really don't need to be concerned with this value. What you'll see is you can use this value of, say, if you were looking at the returns of 2 stocks over a period of time, where the second stock, you'd be inputting that information in the Y registers, if you will. But for here, we're only working with one series, our X series, so we can just simply skip that for right now, okay? So just scroll down, and we're going to enter our second year of data, and that was R8. And then we're going to scroll down here, and we see our Y02. Just leave that blank or as 1, as you will see in the window. And now we've got to calculate or actually input our third value. That was 4, enter, and then you want to come down one more time. All right, now what we want to do is enter our statistics mode, and that would be second and 8 for stat. And you see we see LIN in the window. Now we need to get to 1 minus V. So let's go ahead here. We're going to go second, enter, till we get there, because this is what we want to calculate. Up there we go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to press our down arrow, and you're going to be given a number of 3, right? So that's how many inputs we made into our calculator, into our series, if you will. And there is our mean. As you can see, really not a hard calculation to make there, right? We pretty much knew it was going to be 6. And as you can see, it's displayed nicely in our calculator window for you as well. But obviously a shortcut there, you can add them all up, divide by 3, and you can get the 6. But this is a great way of showing you how you can use various calculations on your calculator by using data, okay? Now, let's move on in our calculations here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at our population mean with probabilities. And we're going to look at our 3 returns once again. I'm going to input those as a whole number. And now we have probabilities here. And this is going to be, say, the tripwire or the red flag or something that can really mess you up on a calculation. You must enter these as whole numbers. And you can see this would be nice, because here, if you were entering your returns as whole numbers and then you enter your probability as whole numbers, everything's nice and consistent and less prone to error. So once again here, we're going to calculate the mean return based on the probability of a given return happening on our particular stock, okay? So let's go ahead and do that here. So we're going to enter our data mode once again. Let's go back to We'll just clear out of here twice, second data, okay? And we're going to clear everything out. Let's start fresh here for you. So we're going to do 6, and then we're going to press enter, all right? Now what we're going to do is now we have a probability. And remember, I said you can use this for calculating stats between two different sets of stock returns, but we also can use this Y01 to calculate probabilities and other sort of things. So it's really up to you how you want to play with the calculator and learn its various functions. So here we're going to go 30 was our probability of our 6% occurring. Remember, has to be a whole number. And then you're going to press enter. And then we're going to scroll down and we're going to do 8. All right, that was our second return that we're concerned with. Enter and then scroll down. Then we're going to do 20. We're going to enter that as well. And then we scroll down and now we got to move our slide ahead. And there we go. We're going to do our third year back to the emulator. 4, enter, down. Our probability was 50, right? We're going to press enter there as well, okay? So now what we're looking at is you can see the probabilities all added up to 100, right? We had 30, 20, and 50, and you want to make sure that would be the case, just in case you think you might have made an error. Just make sure they all add up to 100. All right, so we entered all of our data. Now we got to enter our second, and we're going to enter our stats mode. And now we're going to keep pressing that until we got to this point, 1 minus V or 1 dash V, all right? And now we have that for one variable here. And now we're going to simply press down again. And there's our number right there of 5.4. Now, look here real quick. I skipped over this. Then you say 100. Well, 100%, right? So now we know we're dealing with the 30 plus the 20 plus the 50. So that's where that comes from. And our mean was obviously going to be a little bit different than our 6 because now we have a weight, now we have a probability thrown into place. So our mean is calculated as 5.4. Another great example, okay? All right, let's move on to sample variance and sample standard deviation. And you're looking at these going, oh my word, these look pretty darn hard, these formulas. And guess what? Yeah, they're a little bit difficult, but if you spend some time, interpreting them and understanding what's really going on, it's not that tough. I like to just jump into calculator examples because I always feel that's the best way to understand anything. And really the key difference between the calculation of our population variance and our sample variance here is that the sum of the square deviations for the sample variance is divided by n minus 1 instead of n. And we can see that right here on our screen. And when you're working in any sort of professional exam or calculation, you're going to know what you're working with, where it's a sample or population. It's going to be probably pretty clear to you, okay? So what best way to understand this but diving right into an example. And we're going to stick with our stock here that we've been working with. We have our 3 years. We have our 3 returns on the screen. And once again, I'm going to enter them as whole numbers, and we're going to calculate the sample standard deviation and the variance. We're going to do 2 calculations here. We're going to look at a couple different measures, all right? So let's go ahead and move on to how we're going to calculate that. So we have a lot going on our calculator. Let me clear this out, at least get to the 0. And then we're going to do second. We're going back to data again. And we got to clear all these guys out and make sure that we start fresh. And the reason I'm doing that, you might say, hey, Jim, you already had these numbers inputted, but you might not. You might be starting in a different place. That's why I like to go and start basically all over. So we have our 6, and I'll move ahead a little bit quicker this time. And we're going to go by here. Then we're going to do our 8 once again. And then we're going to get to our third input, and we can see that was simply going back to our 4 once again and down. And now we're going to enter our stats mode, second 8. And now we're going to keep pressing until we get here again, and we're already there, so we don't have to keep pressing. But if there's another value in this window, you would do that if you're working with something else. And now what we're going to do is we're going to keep pressing down until we get to the variables that we're interested in. Once again, we had 3 inputs here. Hey, look at that. There is our mean again. And there's our sample standard deviation of 2. All right, but what does that tell us? Well, we've calculated our sample standard deviation, and that was 2, as you can see on the calculator. But to get to variance, we have to square that number. So if you square that number, our sample variance here is simply going to be 4. So here's our sample variance and also our sample standard deviation. And really, I'd want to understand these because if you got standard deviation, you know you square it to get to variance. If you have variance in the calculation and you need to get to standard deviation, simply take the square root. Okay, so nothing too complicated here. Now, if you scroll down once again into your calculator and you went to this figure here, that's simply the population standard deviation. Okay. All right, let's move on in our discussion here. We're going to look at population variance and standard deviation. And variance is simply the average of the square deviations from the mean, whereas standard deviation is once again the square root of the variance. So I'd also want to know that as well. And you can see we changed our bottom variable here from n minus 1, and it is now n. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our example. We're going to do an expected population variance in this case here. And we're looking at our 3 years of returns. We got our probabilities back. You can see we're going to enter our returns as whole numbers. That's what I would prefer. Once again, we'll enter our probabilities as whole numbers. And we want to calculate the population standard deviation and the variance, okay? And let's go ahead and now dive right into our calculator. And you can see we got a lot going on. We had a lot of things that we've already inputted. So let's go to our second and our data. We're going to start anew once again. So clear our work. And once again, I will move through some of these a little bit quicker. So we're going to do 6, enter, and down. But now we got to enter our probability, right? Like we did before. And that will be 30, enter, down arrow. And then we're going to continue on. Remember, you got to enter those probabilities as whole numbers. So here's our 8. And here's our 20 for our probability of our second variable. Easy for me to say. Now let's go ahead and move to our third variable, which is going to be 4. We're going to scroll down in our 50% probability. Okay, and now we're going to do our second to enter our stat mode. And hey, we're already there to the 1V mode. And now what we're going to do is we're going to press down till we get to where we want to go. There's our 100%. And there is our mean value calculated again at 5.4. And there's our standard deviation. And that's what we want right there, our population standard deviation. And it's 1.5620 and so on. So you can see here I rounded it off on our screen to 1.56. Now to get to our population variance, this is standard deviation. So to get to our variance, you need to square it. That will be our variance. And when you do that calculation, so let's go ahead and do 1.56. Let's see if I can make this happen on the calculator here by just hitting the square key or yeah, perfect. The x2, if you will, right here above the parentheses. So we can see it is 2.44. So once again, how do you get good at these calculations? It's all about practice. Change the numbers, create your own scenarios, dive right in, look at these variables, look at the calculations, change the probabilities and so on, and get an idea of how to interpret these different numbers and what they mean. And it'll really make a big difference to you when you are studying for any professional exam relating to these kind of topics. Well, that's all I have for you today, and I'll see you again in another session. Take care.